It's time. Time to repair. Time to restore. Time to revive. It's time for the Cure National Policy Summit 2017.
But Leslie Hiner is Vice President of Programs at EdChoice, where she directs the Foundation's education programs in collaboration with policymakers, community leaders, and partner organizations. Prior to joining EdChoice, Leslie served as Chief of Staff to the Speaker of House, Counsel to the Senate President Pro Tem, and General Counsel's Deputy to the Secretary of State in Indiana. Leslie is an appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, Indiana State Advisory Committee, and the Indianapolis City Council Ethics Commission. She also serves on the Schools That Can National Advisory Board, and she was a founding board member of the Irvington Community Charter School, serving as chairman of the board for her first 9 years. As Leslie comes forward, can we please play What is School Choice? And let's welcome Leslie Hiner.
What is school choice? It's not as complicated as you might think. School choice is a way governments can give parents back their education tax dollars to choose whatever educational options they think best fit their kids. Here's how it works. It starts with you and your community. Together, you all pay income taxes, sales taxes, or both. Those taxes become the revenue the state uses to pay for education. From there, the state splits up those funds to all families based on their children's needs. Families can then use that money to purchase whichever schooling options, public, private, charter, homeschool, online, or otherwise, they think are best for their kids. An educated child has greater opportunities to succeed and to bring that success back to their community. Like to know how school choice looks today? Although it is not available to all families right now, there are 4 ways many states offer parents choice. Click to learn more about each of them.
All right, good afternoon. What a privilege it is to be with all of you. So first, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. The work that Star and Derek and all of you are doing in your communities, I dare say, I think it matters more than you may realize. There is simply nothing more important in the country right now than for each one of us to reach out to our neighbors, to our elected officials, to teachers, to our kids, to reach out. That responsibility is on us right now to make a difference. And I know that so many of you are, and I'm truly grateful for that. It matters. So I'd like to share with you today a little information about what's happening on the education front. But to begin, I'd like to first ask you this question. What makes your heart sing? What is it deep down inside that brings you great joy? Now, this is a question that I've been asking myself for the last few days. I was reading a book about TED Talks. How to do TED Talks is what the book's about. And the best advice in that book was, figure out the answer to this question, and then talk about that. Advocate for that. Make that your life's mission, whatever that is that makes your heart sing. And then I realized, I have to say thankfully, I think I'm in the right job. Because for me, I very quickly came around to some children that I've met since 1986, which is when I first started advocating for educational choice. So these are children like the girl who was a high school student, 9th grade. She lived in Watts, Los Angeles, in between 2 warring gangs. She was a little girl who was beaten by her father nearly to death, left for dead. And then the principal of her little school found her, nursed her back to health, both academically and physically. And then there's the little boy and the little girl in Indianapolis, Indiana. They were plucked off the streets by a nun who saw them wandering one day when they should have been in school. They were dirty, they were hungry, they really couldn't communicate very well. Well, they were homeless. And they figured that they probably had a father, but they had no idea, really. And their mother was drug addicted and sold crack just to get by. And they would go every night, these two children, they'd wander into one block. This was their universe, one block in the city. And they'd look for that house where the party was going to be that night. And wherever that was, then they knew that they could sneak into that house because the adults would be too high to even notice them. And they would go into a little corner where they knew they could curl up and they could get some sleep. So then the next day they could go to school, their neighborhood public school, where they would be dirty, they'd be hungry, they didn't know discipline, they didn't even know what discipline looked like, and so they'd get in trouble, and then they'd be sent home, which then led to them wandering the streets, which led then to a couple nuns from St. Philip Neri Parish in Indianapolis who found them and connected them with a scholarship granting organization so that then these two children could go to the little school that was run by that church. And then there's the other little boy who, at 11 years old, told me that he was a complete and utter failure. Everything in his life was bad. He also figured he had a father, didn't know. His mother was drug addicted, hadn't seen her for a long time. Grandma was taking care of him. Grandma hated him, sadly, hated him. Because every day he'd go to school, he'd get in trouble, he'd get sent home, she'd get called if they could find her and at work, and she'd have to go pick him up. So about every week she would lose a job. And she came to hate her grandson. Okay, now here's where the joy comes in. Where the joy comes in is this little boy that I just talked about. He got into the charter school that I opened. And he was very excited about it. And I wanted him to succeed in the worst way as you can imagine. And he did. Turns out, he became a really great reader. He loved reading. He couldn't read enough books. So every night he'd go home and he'd go to Grandma and read to her. So after about 1.5 years of this, Grandma came into the school and said, "So do you have any adult literacy classes? Because I can't read." But she was so inspired suddenly from hating her grandson to being inspired by her grandson, took the adult literacy classes, and the two of them marched downtown to find the mom, get her in rehab, get her into the adult literacy classes. Okay, now that's a family that's reunited. And this little boy, when I looked into his eyes, they just sparkled because he had discovered the joy of learning. And what's even better than that, he discovered that when you have that joy of learning, you're free. You're free to do anything you want to do. You can be successful. People can like you. Your grandma can love you. It's that joy. That's what makes my heart sing and why I've been advocating for educational choice for all these years, because there are countless children like the children I've just described to you. There's a smaller number of those children who have seen the kind of success that I just described to you. So now the good news today is that people are starting to get this, that when you talk about school choice, educational choice, you're really not talking about public schools, because you're talking about something else. You're talking about an additional option for children to be educated. That's what this is all about. Some children need it and some children don't. But some children just don't fit in wherever they are. Or some children have circumstances in their lives where, like one mother said to me, she couldn't even imagine her son going to a school that was not a faith-based school. They were very faithful at home, and for him to go someplace else where they were not faithful all day long, she just struggled to see how that could even work for him. It was really critical for him to go to a faith-based school. And he was, and he was doing well. So these are the things, these stories, this is what's fueling the movement across the country right now. So I'm happy to report to you that there are now 63 school choice programs in 30 states plus here in DC. So that's a lot. And more children are coming along. Now, yes, this is good news, right? This is good news. Yeah, we just have to be able to reach those children who need us to reach them. Again, this is our job. This is our responsibility. You will find this in every one of your communities. Every one. So, with 63 programs, tremendous growth. This is great. I'd like to let you know that the one that we didn't think would happen, happened this year, and that was Illinois. The state of Illinois recently enacted a tax credit scholarship program. It is the biggest school choice program ever enacted. There's $100 million worth of scholarships that will now be available to kids in the state of Illinois. Yeah, this is great, right? This is great. And even this, the superintendent and the deputy superintendent of the Chicago Public Schools recently had a big press conference to say, hey, we want everybody to know we're working really hard in our public schools and it's starting to pay off. Kids are doing better. They're starting to thrive now. And then when asked, well, so what'd you do differently? What's happening? Their response was, well, there's competition now. So now two things are happening. Teachers, principals, superintendents of smaller districts even are looking at this to say, hey, kids don't have to go to our public schools. They might go to charter schools, which they have. Now they have the scholarship program, so there will be more competition. And it makes everybody sit up a little bit. Maybe you dress a little nicer when you go into work. Maybe you work a little harder. Maybe you eat the oatmeal that Derek was talking about earlier to get you fueled up for your day so you could do maybe a little better. It inspires people. And for parents, suddenly, they really care about who the teacher is. Okay, so is this a good teacher, bad teacher? What's happening in that school? Oh, what's happening in the school? Well, then the parents want to go in and find out. And that's what the superintendent of the Chicago Public Schools talked about, that there's a new positive environment there, and it's infecting the public schools in a very positive way, to which I say kudos, good for them. This is all we want, right? We want great schools, no matter what kind of school they are. We want that for all of our kids. Because we can't say what's going to be the right school or the wrong school, the right fit or the wrong fit. For any child, the parent might be able to do that, or a nun who finds a child along the street might be able to do that. So the growth is really great. Now, let's talk a little bit, though, about what might hold us back a little bit. Okay, so there are a couple things. The first thing is, and I understand that you've learned recently in some of the literature that's been sent to you about the Blaine amendments in states. And we've had litigation, U.S. Supreme Court, Trinity Lutheran case arising out of Missouri, said that, essentially, the government cannot discriminate against churches just because they're churches. If there are government funds or some kind of program where it's competitive to get the funds, like in the case of Trinity Lutheran, to get those rubber pellets to put on playgrounds for kids so they don't skin their knees, The government can't say, well, the public entities can participate. Oh yeah, but you churches? Yeah, because you're churches. You're those religious people, and heaven forbid, you might pray on the playground, and then what would we do? Which was the thinking. This was literally the thinking. Well, they might pray on the playground, so how can they get funds for the rubber pellets on their playground? Ridiculous, right? Really ridiculous. Thankfully, U.S. Supreme Court said, that's ridiculous. And in fact said, and I quote, it is odious to our Constitution to discriminate directly in this way against religious entities. So this is a wonderful thing. Now the question will be, how will that ruling apply to these restrictive Blaine amendments in states? We don't know the answer to that yet. But I can tell you this, that the very next day after the Trinity Lutheran case, the U.S. Supreme Court vacated 2 decisions that they thought were discriminatory against religion. One was the voucher program in Douglas County, Colorado, and the other one was a textbook case out of New Mexico. The court vacated the adverse decisions of those states' Supreme Courts and said, we think you need to reconsider. So they are doing that right now. So those are 2 cases that we all want to pay very close attention to see how the state courts interprets this ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court. But we're headed in the right direction, and I'm pretty excited about that. That gives me some joy too. Okay, now, this is where you come in. So with all this activity, so we have growth, school choice programs, we have parents now who are getting more engaged and more interested. This is all positive. Now the Blaine amendments, they're on the rocks now. We may actually have a renewal of our religious liberty. That's great. Okay, what are we going to do about it? Well, there's some work to be done. As I started this, I talked about how each one of us, this is our time right now to do a little extra work, to go into our communities one by one, neighbor by neighbor, and to talk about what really needs to be done. I'd like to refer to a survey that was recently done by the United Negro College Fund, UNCF. It just came out just a little bit ago, and they surveyed what they called grass tops African Americans. Primarily, the age was between 45, 49. It was an exhaustive study. It was really, really well done. And so they asked people, what are you willing to do? So we have a crisis in education right now. What are you going to do about it? These were the questions that they asked. Now, in the answers, though, I'd really like to address the answers. Because they asked, well, what have you done? Most of them said, well, I gave money to candidates who said they supported education in the right way. That was number one, 71%. And then they provided financial support. So they gave money to school fundraisers and that sort of thing. And then talked to people in the community about what's good about education, what's necessary. At the bottom of the list, starting at the bottom, was write an op-ed or a letter to the editor, serve on the board of an education initiative, join or start an education advocacy organization, engage with the local school board, go to board meetings, talk to elected officials one-on-one. Okay, all of those things at the bottom of the list, that list needs to flip. Because that kind of advocacy is what will make a difference. Giving money is fine, participating in the political process is fine, but I love this quote from Milton Friedman, who said, you know, it's fine to elect the right people and expect them to do the right thing. But if you really want to change the world, you need to go to the wrong people who are elected and convince them to do the right thing. That's when you will see real change. And that requires you to go out into the community and be very public about what you believe and what makes your heart sing and what you're willing to do about that. So lucky you have STAR, You have Derek. You have this wonderful organization. So you have a foundation to draw on. You have each other to draw on. You're all very competent in your own communities. That's a lot of power right here in this room. Don't overlook that. Each of you together with each other, that's where the real power is. Now, additionally, we can provide resources or we can connect you with people. But besides that, there are others who are doing the same thing. For example, used to be, if you wanted to open up a private school, it was going to be hard to do. It was pretty hard to open up a charter school, but a little bit easier because there were more resources. Pretty tough to open up a new private school. But that was then. Now, people are rising up. So now there are foundations, there are funders who are willing to come in, and this is just starting, mind you, but they're willing to come in and help support the growth of private schools and building new private schools. Additionally, last night I sat next to a professor in Oklahoma City, and he started an education entrepreneurs program where you can get college credit for this. And everything that he's explained, it maps out how to do it. So if you want to start a school, you want to expand your school, there's no reason why you can't, because there are a lot of people around the country who are available to help you do that. Additionally, if you've ever thought about teaching, we desperately need more African American teachers in the country, across the country. So if it's not you, think of someone who could. So with that, before Derek comes up here, I'd like to really encourage you to think about that question. What really makes your heart sing? As I've been doing this, it's been a wonderful thing to go a little deeper into what really motivates me for the mission. And this is it. It's the joy of learning, because that's what opens freedom. Thank you.
That's good. I'm going to ask her a couple of questions, and I want to also give an opportunity for you to ask questions. She is a wealth of knowledge and information in terms of what's going on in this arena. And if you're thinking about collaborating and starting a school or a program or something like that, or have issues around maybe yours that you got or something like that, I want you to ask those questions. But I'll start off by this, Leslie, real quick.
Yeah.
And saying, help me understand, you said a lot, you said a mouthful, especially with the study that was on.
Right.
How, can you help me get that one of the things that we need to be flipping is really, like you said, the bottom stuff on the layer,
right,
is really advocating and really pushing some of these ideas, like getting out in the community? Is that what you're talking about? Or
absolutely.
I mean, as far as pastors and whatnot, how can they really jump in there and make a big difference on this?
Yes, one of the more disheartening things that I've seen is when good people who are highly motivated get involved in the community, and of course the first thing they want to do is maybe get involved with maybe a public school district or a community foundation, but something that's involving the schools, or maybe a charter association, or maybe a private school association. So here's what happens though. We find that if you can connect with a private school association, they'll probably give you more work than you can handle. They will welcome you and give you a job really quickly. So that's good. Faith-based and independent both, but the faith-based groups are really awesome. Okay, with the charter organizations, they have faced some difficulty because in some of the states where charters have been around for a really long time, like creeping government regulation has come to them. And so they're finding it more difficult to be innovative and to serve directly the unique needs of the kids who are coming to them. So there are a lot of places across the country where they're really struggling. Now, if you have good ideas on how to cut through some of that, they would welcome you too. In the public school system, what often happens that will cause people to get very excited about helping their public school and then walk away after a couple years is because so much of the activity at the public school is controlled by the teachers' union. It's controlled by contracts. There was one of the statements in the UNCF study where someone said, well, they'd like to get involved with public schools so that their kids could develop a direct line into more STEM courses, make a connection with local businesses where they could have some internships and that sort of thing. And that's great, with the exception that I've seen too often where people get co-opted because so much of that activity has already been defined and controlled by union contracts. So your ability to really make change will happen first at the private school level and on the education reform side of things, or if you know some teachers who are strong and they have their own ideas about how to educate children and they're just really great teachers, help them. Help the teachers, work with them. Help them to find that way to move into an area where they're not so constricted by old contracts.
That's good. Do I have two questions or a couple questions? Yes, I'll ask you and then I'll go to start. Yes, sir.
We've recently started a private Christian school.
Good.
We have a new facility. We got excellent staff. But our community is trying to break it and show the value of private school.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you mention that there are foundations and organizations that we probably partner with that can help us to move the scale.
Yes.
How can we find out what those are?
What state are you in?
South Carolina.
Oh, good. Well, I was just with some folks from South Carolina who, they're really eager to get going in South Carolina. They have a couple tax credit programs there. But they're just not catching on quite like they should. I think part of it's because of the regulatory piece of government. They didn't do it right on the governmental side. And so now they're really looking to expand. But they understand, and I may have said this to them also, that as we're expanding school choice, we have to understand that so many of the private schools, they're not as big and not as many as there used to be. So there's not necessarily the kind of capacity that we need. So this $100 million program in Illinois, $100 million worth of scholarships is going to help a whole lot of kids as long as they have a place to go. And it's a good quality school. So that piece has to be interconnected. So I can connect you with the people from South Carolina who are working on this, because this will be a part of it. And as we're advocating for choice across the country, we're making this a key element of any kind of coalition, collaboration in a state. You have to think about the supply side. What are you going to do when the kids have opportunity? Yeah. You need to have that ready for them. Yeah, so I can help you with that. And that's one of the things, and the bigger answer to your question is that we know people who are doing things in all the different states. So if we're not doing it, we'll know who is, and we can just connect you.
Start.
Right.
On blame, we did not have discussion, so could you explain to the pastors what the blame amendment is? They can have the listening.
Oh, sure. Yes, thank you. So the Blaine Amendment is this old awful thing that was put forward by a man named Blaine, Mr. Blaine from Maine, actually. His name is still kicking around in Maine. The governor's mansion is called the Blaine House, even today. But he decided that the Protestant schools, the public schools were Protestant back in the 1800s. Actually, they were Protestant in the 1900s when I was in elementary school, and even though I am aging, not that old, but we used to compete for who got to read the Bible verse for the day in my public school. So, public schools have been Protestant, either all in, like in the day of Blaine, or it lingered for a long time. But he thought they should stay that way. But then Catholics came over, and with this new immigrant population, well, they had a different Bible. Well, he didn't like that very much, and so he didn't like that very much. And he was afraid that the Catholics might try to influence the public schools or start up their own schools. And so he actually had a national movement to amend the U.S. Constitution to include a phrase that says that no public funds can ever go to any private schools or any private religious schools. That failed. There were only, I believe, 10 states who signed up for that. Well, he didn't like that, so then he went state by state to encourage states to put this in their constitutions. Now, given that this was in the 1800s and he was from Maine, he started on that side of the country and kind of moved forward. And so you'll find Blaine amendments in 34 state constitutions, and they are very restrictive. So in Missouri, for example, the Missouri Supreme Court said, no, you can't go give those rubber pellets to that church for their playground so the kids don't skin their knees, because our Constitution says you can't do it. No public money to religious entities. Now, they could have read that passage differently, I believe. I'm a lawyer. But they didn't. They read that passage, the Blaine Amendment, in their Constitution very strictly and said, you're out of luck. That's the piece that the U.S. Supreme Court overturned and said, no, you shouldn't read it that way. Now, this is significant because there have been a couple other states, like, for example, in my state of Indiana, we have the biggest voucher program in the country. And so, of course, we were sued. It goes hand in hand. But our court ruled that our Blaine Amendment, which was one of the classic Blaines, and very restrictive, doesn't apply to education. It's across the board. We're not applying this to education in any way. So that was nice. But there also have been a line of cases. We have a couple U.S. Supreme Court cases dealing with the federal application of the First Amendment to education. But at the state level, we've had a whole line of decisions now where the state courts have said, like, for example, in Nevada has an education savings account where the money for a child's education literally goes into an account. Parent accesses it to send the child to access whatever education the child needs. And the court ruled, at that moment when the public funds are deposited into this parent's account, that money's not public. At that point, that money is private money, and it's private because the parent is controlling what to do with it. Parent can send the child to a religious school or not a religious school, but it's the parent's decision. The government has nothing to do with it.
Wow.
So these decisions, I'm really heartened by these. It's just, we're trending in the best direction possible for religious liberty. That's what this is. So I am hopeful now that when Colorado and New Mexico, for example, when they take a second look now at their Blaine amendments, that they will look at them with a different eye. So some of the very restrictive interpretations of this crazy Mr. Blaine from Maine in the 1800s, that they'll look at it differently. And some of the religious liberty that we have lost as a result of these Blaine amendments will be restored.
Wow. You hear a recurring theme of the religious liberty aspect of things. I got one more question here, and it's Pastor Ewell, and then we will. We got to keep moving. So,
it was recently reported that Betsy DeVos was before a Senate hearing in reference to the funds being allocated for the vouchers, et cetera, and she was asked about applicable laws relative to abortion, homosexual, whatever, and she was alleged, well, the article said, she said that this money brings with it the responsibility of adhering to all now written laws. If that is correct, then there's some things that would be they would be a little difficult for some of the schools if, in fact, you got to teach the transgender, you got to teach the same sex. So is it correct that with this money comes the knowledge, or you should have the knowledge, you got to now adhere to all written laws as they presently are?
Well, the answer to that question, and I'm sorry, but it's both yes and no. Okay, so let me explain. First of all, private schools today, private religious schools, are overregulated today. We've done some studies on this. We do the studies periodically to see where that stands, and you'd probably be really surprised at all the regulations that are currently in existence on private schools and private religious schools. It's too much. Anytime there's a school choice program that's being proposed, I always tell people, look, this is your opportunity. Take a look at those laws, those regulations right now that you're being overregulated. You can fix that now. Dig into it. Make things right. But her concern that she voiced, though, that if you do accept children who are coming to you paying for tuition at your school using a voucher or using a scholarship, that there will be some requirements on the private school. We at EdChoice stand almost uniquely so as a national group that stands strongly against the imposition of any more regulations. It's just we just stand against that. And I'm making the legal point, and I keep doing this, and feel free to do this too, that when we have the line of cases that says that when the money is appropriated for a child and then the parent decides what to do with it, okay, there's a break between the government and the parent. Well, let's not screw that up then by reestablishing a connection through some regulation on the private school, because once you start going down that road, then it's going to be unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So our backstop, I mean, we do have something good going for us, which is the Constitution is on our side. And the U.S. Supreme Court's interpretation of these provisions now is also on our side. So we do have a strong leg to stand on that should any regulators want to come in and do more regulation, we can push back, and we do. And we do that every day, but we can do it in court now also because we have a good leg to stand on. But in some cases, though, and just quickly, for example, testing is that's a big thing. That now you have to test all of your children using a certain test. Yeah, we don't like that either. But in many states, private schools are already testing their kids, and so if the law says you have to keep doing what you're doing, okay, that's okay. You know, that's not an imposition, but it's a recognition of what you're doing already. I'm saying, yeah, that's good. Wow. But that's a hot button, though, and we'll stay on that. Yes.
Rules for starting a homeschool.
For homeschooling, that varies pretty wildly from state to state. So, for example, in Oklahoma,
The question was, what's the basic rule for starting a homeschool?
The base rule?
The basic rule for starting a homeschool. I'm just saying that so everybody else can hear it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, the basic rule for starting. Well, I think that, honestly, it's a big job. I've met a lot of homeschoolers. I've met with a lot of homeschoolers. And I think it's really important for people when they're considering it to talk to people who have been doing it for a long time and get some advice and get some support. Now, whether or not you can do that in your state will depend on what your Constitution says, if anything, and what your state laws say, and whether you like that or not. In Oklahoma, you can just start homeschooling your child because their Constitution says so. You have an absolute right.
You said homeschool or school?
Homeschool.
Homeschool. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
It's all right, keep me straight, Derek.
No.
That's good.
I just want to make sure you said homeschool. That's good. Did that answer?
He's good.
Okay, good
He's
to go.
good. Yeah, but in other states there are more restrictions to it. So you can either check with the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund, or give me a call.
There you go. That's good. Let's give Leslie Hiner applause. We thank you again. What I want you to take out of this is that you can connect back with EdChoice. You can connect with Leslie. We will definitely be a conduit for that, and then she will be around as well to answer any other questions, and to just do that. She's incredible. So. The other side. What do you mean other side? Oh, school choice. Yeah. Can I do this? If you don't mind, Leslie, because what I'd like to do, I'm going to say thank you very much to Leslie, and because I want to get our, we have a final keynote that we'll have addressed in just a few moments, but for 5 minutes, that's a great lead-in, because I really want to make sure I introduce you to this other fine gentleman who came, and I knew he was at another event. He was pressing to make sure he gets over 2 hours, but I want to give him 5 so that he can just at least greet you, talk to you for a few moments, and he could easily answer that question as well. Mr. Gerard Robinson, he's from AEI. He was over there with us a bit yesterday, and he's a scholar there. He has an incredible history in terms of the background, the things he did in the state of Virginia, the state of Florida, serving as the deputy Secretary of Education in which one, Florida or? Secretary, there you go, Secretary, Deputy Secretary. Hey. But basically being involved in this plight quite a bit, incredible history, also incredible voice and advocate in this arena, as well as others. But at least let Gerard come up, greet you, and just meet with you for one moment. Thank you very much, or a couple minutes. And he had the question, Gerard, you heard him tell the other side of this issue and the other coin. Yes, sir.
Good seeing you. First of all, sorry for being late. I was actually filming a documentary about the Blaine Amendment.
Wow.
And we're having a conversation.
Wow.
So when the Reverend and I spoke, I said, I have an event, and of course I'm not a professional actor. It took me 1.5 million takes to finally get my piece together. But I'm here. Let me just start off with your question. In 1991, I was a 5th grade school teacher at the Marcus Garvey School in Los Angeles, private school. Guy walked into the office and said, we want Californians to support an initiative to get a voucher on the ballot. 1991, I had no idea what a voucher was. Milwaukee, only city in the country at the time with a voucher. I said, what's the voucher? He said, make it real simple. If 477,000 people at the time sign an initiative, we'll put the ballot initiative before voters in California, and they can vote on whether to give families $1,500 to go to a private school. Now, I was immediately sold because I had just lost one of my favorite students. It was a 2-parent home, but they chose to be a 1-income household. And with that comes challenges, and with that also comes grace. And we tried to work with them, but one day he said, Brother Gerard, we just can't make ends meet. We have to pull our child out of school. That could have made a difference in her life. The ballot initiative was put before the California voters in 1993. It was soundly defeated, 70% against, 30% for.
Wow.
In 2000, we tried it again in California. The vote, 70% against, 34. In Michigan, the same thing. Here are the 3 reasons. Number one, people said we should not give public money to religious schools because of the separation of what? Church and state. I know you know that one well. And so I said, really? They said, yeah. I said, first of all, the separation of church and state appears nowhere in the Constitution. That's number one. Number two, Thomas Jefferson wasn't in the United States when they were debating in 1787 the nuances of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. He was in Europe. Number three, it was 1803 that he wrote a letter to some Danbury Baptists about the importance of separation of church and state. So from a constitutional standpoint, has no ground. Number two, if you say public money should not support religious institutions, someone should have told that to President Lyndon Johnson. When he signed the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that law said Title I money, which goes to low-income kids, can go to private religious and independent schools. Number two, if you have a school and you have low-income students, you qualify for Title II money, professional development for teachers. For nearly 40 years, religious schools have received public money. But if that one won't get you, the same Congress that you said separated church and state has a full-time person of faith who will open up Congress with what? Prayer. So part of it's church and state. Number two is you're taking money away from public education. Every time a student drops out, you take money away from public education. Every time a student reads but somehow graduates and is functionally illiterate and unlikely to participate in our knowledge economy, we know that over that child's lifetime as an adult, anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million investment in other services. But I won't pretend that it's not, quote unquote, taking money away from public education, but let's remember, it's not the public education's money, it's the taxpayers' dollars. And if you don't think it's the taxpayers' dollars, take your kid out of school for 6 months and see if the sheriff will come arrest you or the superintendent of schools. It won't be the superintendent of schools because it's you. But I do think as a community of faith and as Choice supporters, we at least need to talk about the money and what should happen. Lastly, from a black perspective, public schools help build the black middle class in the United States. I'm very clear about that. Many of us are here today because of great public school teachers we have. When we talk about school choice, we say we want freedom and opportunity and options for children. But what some of them are hearing is, oh, you want me to lose my job? Because fewer students, less money, first in, last out, I may lose my job. And so we should have a conversation that, yeah, many people in our community hear this differently. But let's also remember that before we created free universal public school systems in the South, after Reconstruction, when formerly enslaved Africans walked off slave plantations in places like Virginia and turned whipping posts into lecterns, we were always saying that the path to freedom was through education, but it was in multiple paths: private, public, homeschool, alternative, virtual. And so these are some of the reasons why we have to do this, and we just have to be honest about those conversations. I'll stop now because I know I've got to turn it over, but what I want to say is this is a great time for people of faith to be involved in this conversation. Learn from other faith leaders who have schools. I'm on the board of the largest tax credit program in Georgia. We've invested $93 million, not 93,000, $93 million into private schools in Georgia who are giving students opportunities. And we have a partnership with British Petroleum, who says we can't find enough students, particularly students of color, in STEM education. We now have students who are graduating, and we have a network of black, mostly Atlanta-based, but also DeKalb and other places, who are working with us. So I'm saying don't start. If the goal is to revive and restore and repair, particularly the breach, one of the greatest things we can do is talk to other people who've been in this movement a long time. Leslie, myself, and the Reverend have plenty of examples for you. Again, I'm glad you guys were at AEI yesterday. I worked there, and I'm glad to be of service.
Thank you, sir.
If you have any questions, please contact the Cure's National Clergy Network office at 202-479-2873 or visit our website at urbancure.org